Greetings, my friend. Welcome again to the podcast, Teaching That Transforms with Pastor Jimmy Knott. Thanks so much for joining me again today. We continue our series on the life and time of that amazing Old Testament prophet Elijah. He just shows up out of nowhere 3 years ago in 1 Kings chapter 17, summoned by his Jehovah God to deliver a word of judgment to the most powerful people of his day, King Ahab and wicked Queen Jezebel. He delivers that message that there'll be no rain until God tells him to send rain again. To continue his training and preparation for the conflicts and difficulties that were in front of him, God put him in basic training at Brook Kerith, where he learned some valuable lessons, and then advanced training 100 miles north in Zarephath, where he learned even more lessons. And then last time, that amazing chapter 18, where he faced the impossible odds and came out victorious over King Ahab and the false prophets of Baal. I guess you could say that would have been a perfect ending. But life's not always perfect, is it? I know mine isn't, and I'm sure yours isn't either. God wasn't done. Elijah wasn't done. And we find him in chapter 19, discouraged, you might even say, depressed. Who hasn't been? I know I have in my journey at times. Who hasn't been discouraged? Sometimes discouraged even to the point of depression. All of us at times have been under the broom tree. Even great believers like Moses, Job, Jonah, and even Paul have felt that dark cloud of deep discouragement and depression come over them. As I said, I know that I have. Now Elijah faces that same dilemma. How could that be? How could that happen after the spiritual high that took place just a few days before? He had learned so many valuable lessons. Let me review them quickly. There are a lot, but they're important. He had learned God is real and alive. He had learned God rules. He's in control. He had learned God gives us resources. He had learned where God leads, He provides. He had experienced God is faithful. He had watched God specialize in taking very little and making it much. God honors faith and obedience. God's word is true, so obey it. God cares for all people. Life struggles are preparations for the next struggle. Then last week, some valuable lessons. When we're confident we're in God's will, we're invincible. Divided loyalty is as wrong as open idolatry. Prayer really matters. Never underestimate the impact of one totally devoted life. He'd experienced and learned all of that. And yet, in chapter 19, we find him under a broom tree, depressed, even asking God to take his life. What happened? How could he go from the mountaintop into the black hole of deep discouragement and depression? He forgot. He forgot. He forgot all the lessons that God had taught him through those years. I don't know about you, but I know that I forget as well. God has to often keep reminding me of the things that I've already learned, where He has proven Himself to be faithful, and He's taken me through the times of difficulty and strengthened me as a result of it. You know, maybe boot camp, maybe advanced training doesn't prepare us for everything. And the fact that we find ourselves in a pit of despair doesn't necessarily mean that we're out of fellowship with God. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's some overt, unconfessed sin in our life. Maybe it's just a symptom of something going on deeply inside of us. But let's look at this chapter 19, because as the high of chapter 18 is followed by the low of chapter 19. Such is life. Such is life. Listen to these opening verses. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with a sword. So Ahab runs home and tells his wicked wife all that had happened. How does she respond? Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, "So may the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." She promises Elijah, "I'm going to kill you." Verse 3, then he was afraid. Yes, That's what the passage says. Then he was afraid. He rose and ran for his life, and he came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. It's about 100 miles from where he was in Jezreel, south of Mount Carmel, where that great confrontation had taken place. And then, once he got to Beersheba, he himself went a day's journey, another 15 to 25 miles into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked God that he might die, saying, "It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." On the mountain victorious over King Ahab, Baal's prophets, God's people, even outrunning Ahab's chariot down the mountain after the great rains had begun to come. Bold, confident, and faithful. Now we find him, chapter 19, in a valley, defeated by the threat of one woman, running for his life, vacillating between running from threatened death and asking to die, afraid, disillusioned, discouraged, depressed. You know, we're often most vulnerable after a great victory. Many times our highs and our lows come very close together. Often our greatest trials follow our greatest blessings. Seems to be a pattern. Fearful, then we get impatient. We disobey by taking matters in our own hands. It's amazing to me in my own journey, and I'm sure it's true in yours, and we see it here in Elijah's. It's amazing how quickly faith can turn to fear. Faith can just quickly turn to fear. We get a bad health report. We get let go on our job. Something happens to our kids or to our parents. And that great faith that we had in God, that he had proven himself so faithful for so many occasions and so many times, all of a sudden is quickly replaced by fear. Why the change? How can a man of faith, and we be people of faith, become fear so fast? Remember, the New Testament writer James said, James tells us that Elijah had a nature just like us. We do tend to be up and down in life, and our highs are often followed by lows. But I really do think there were some factors that led to his great discouragement and depression. And my guess is some of these same factors are contributing at times when you and I get overly discouraged and even find ourselves depressed. First of all, he was wiped out physically. Wiped out physically. He had already run down the Mount of Jezreel some 30 to 40 miles outrunning a chariot. That was just another miracle that God had kind of thrown in. And now he travels 100 miles, again, on foot through desert, rugged terrain. And then he goes another day's journey into the wilderness. You know, he'd probably traveled 100 to 125 miles. And he said, "It's enough, Lord. Take away my life." And he lay down and slept under the broom tree. And behold, an angel touched him and said to him, "Arise and eat." And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and laid down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you." And he arose and ate and drank, and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, or to Mount Sinai, the Mount of God. There he came to a cave and lodged in it. So much had happened to him physically. He had to be totally exhausted. 3 years of famine. Faced and slain 450 prophets and a day-long 9-hour confrontation. No telling how many meals and how much sleep he had missed. He runs 30 miles to Jezreel, more than a marathon. He receives a death threat. He's one overworked prophet. Vince Lombardi, that great coach of the Green Bay Packers, said, "Fatigue makes cowards of us all." He was absolutely wiped out physically. So what does God do? God sent an angel to feed him. He slept, he rested, he learned to relax. It was such an important thing. When life gets overwhelming, we get discouraged and depressed, we don't need to keep going. We need to slow down. We need to take care of our body. We need to refresh physically by eating better, by getting sleep, by exercising. Those are the things that are important, because when the physical goes, we become cowards. All of us do. So God meets him. God meets him. He doesn't lecture him. He doesn't shame him and guilt him. He doesn't criticize him. He certainly doesn't abandon him. He finds him, and he makes sure that he gets fed, and he makes sure that he catches up on his sleep. Wow. But one of the factors that led to his depression was he was wiped out physically. Secondly, he was stressed out emotionally. Stressed out emotionally. Let me continue reading. And he arose, and he ate and drank and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai, the Mount of God. That's probably another 200 miles plus. This is the same mountain where God gave Moses the 10 Commandments. It was a mountain where you could meet God. There he came to a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him and said to him. And he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He said, "I have been jealous, very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with a sword. And I, even I only, am left. And they seek my life to take it away." And God said, "Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord." And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains. Can you imagine how strong a wind has to be to tear rocks off a mountain? And broke into pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak, and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him, and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah said, "I've been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away." Wow. Just absolutely stressed out emotionally. The anticipation, the excitement of Mount Carmel, the adrenaline rush is gone. He's spent emotionally. And what takes over? Self-pity. Totally absorbed in himself, in the fact that he was being pursued and threatened. But God knew that. That didn't catch him by surprise at all. God simply and gently finds him and asks him really the same questions twice. What are you doing here? Now, you and I know that God wasn't seeking information for himself. God knew. God was trying to help Elijah and us in our times of depression and discouragement to understand where we are. What does our current reality look like? So that question really opened the lines of communication. Patiently, God twice allowed Elijah to vent his frustrations, to air his feelings, openly, honestly, responsibly. Whenever we are emotionally, physically and emotionally burned out, our mind can play some dirty tricks on us, can't they? So we need to talk it out, and we need to release those emotions that can be poisonous and embrace the release that God gives to us. There's a third thing that happened. He was emptied out spiritually. His spiritual condition was desolate. In all other instances up to this point, when the crisis and the difficulty time came, he prayed and he ran to God. But this time, for some reason, he didn't. In response to her threat, he was afraid and he ran. Up to now, he had been totally fixed on God. Now, he eyed his enemy and ran. His spiritual well was empty. And he needed to refocus vertically and spiritually. God helps him to think clearly and realistically now. Elijah had momentarily, as I said, failed to pray, stopped listening to God, and started looking at his circumstances. Could not the same God who had delivered him from 850 false prophets protect him from one woman? Of course he could. He lost his vertical perspective, and he needed to refocus. He forgot the very first lesson that God had taught him, that God is real and God is alive. So how did God help him refocus spiritually? Well, he invited him into his presence. He spoke to him. He invited him to commune with him and to communicate with him. He did something else. He also told him that he wasn't through with him. Let me continue reading in verses 15 to 18. And the Lord said to him, Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha, that's important, the son of Shaphat, of Abel Meholah, shall anoint to be the prophet in your place. And the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death, and the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elijah put to death. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel. All the knees have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. What's God doing? God's giving him another assignment. God still had a plan. He wasn't through with him, and nor is he through with us. He reminded him that he was not alone. He reminded him that he would be with him. It was so very, very important. Elijah, for unknown reasons, just felt underappreciated and he felt indispensable. He ended up afraid and exhausted and alone. Why? Because he gave in to his feelings. And whenever we do that, we'll give up on our responsibilities. But God reminded him that he wasn't alone, that there were thousands of other faithful people to Jehovah God, and that God was going to use him for a while longer, but God had someone to replace him. God gave him a friend. So what happened? Well, he was wiped out physically. God refreshed him. He was stressed out emotionally, and God came to him and ministered to him. He was emptied out spiritually, and God came to him and ministered to him. And then he was dried out relationally, and God gave him a friend, a close friend, in Elijah. You remember earlier, Elijah had a servant when he left Jezreel, but when he got down to Beersheba, he left him there and went alone. Often, when we're in discouragement and despair, we want to escape the relationships and be alone. When we're isolated from the strengthening friendships, we become very, very vulnerable. Very, very vulnerable. Satan wants to get us alone. He wants to isolate us. But God gave him a new friend that would follow him the rest of the days of his ministry and really would be transitioned into being his successor as he moved forward. So God found his fearful, fleeing, despairing, depressed, wanting to die prophet. Now, we may not identify with all of the victories that took place in chapter 18 on Mount Carmel, but I'll bet you we identify with what takes place, fully identify in the valley of despair. What were the lessons? What were the lessons that Elijah take away and we can take away? After so many lessons so far, are there new ones? Yes, there are. Let me mention 4. Blessings. Blessings make us vulnerable. So be aware, be alert, be sensitive. After spiritual highs, after good things happen in your journey and my journey, be alert, be sensitive. Blessings, victory makes us vulnerable. Next, take care of the temple. When we become a Christian, God's Spirit comes to live inside of us and we are his temple. So we need to eat well. We need to sleep enough. We need to get exercise. We need to see the doctor. We need to take care of the temple so we'll be at our best for him. Third, focus on him. Focus on God over the circumstances. Focus on him. Go to him. Focus on him. Pray to him when the difficulties come your way. And then last, always remember, God loves you and me, and he relentlessly pursues us when we find ourselves in difficult situations. He knows, he understands, and he cares. And he offers this wise counsel when we find ourselves in the pit of discouragement, despair, and underneath that broom tree. Refresh physically, release emotionally, refocus spiritually, and reconnect horizontally. Amen? Hey, friend, thanks for listening to Teaching That Transforms. It only transforms when we apply it. And I pray that you do that with today's lessons. Blessings from Pastor Jimmy. I'll see you next time.